Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm Georgina from TomorrowNow, and I'm going to be leading the session today. Before I introduce you to our special guests, first, I'm going to explain the title, because today we're talking about weather intelligence and climate action. And I actually changed the title last minute from climate adaptation to climate action. And this is because we really need to focus on action. And that's not just climate action from the perspective of reducing carbon emissions, net zero, right? And of course, that's important and it's a big focus of COP26. But also, we want to make sure that one of the focuses is on the climate actions that must be taken now to adapt to our changing climate. And that's the climate actions that need to be taken now by people and the regions most in need. Climate change is here. We must help people proactively adapt and act in time to protect life and property, right? Global weather intelligence really matters in this context, in the context of our changing climate. And this really is the key takeaway from today's session. So we're going to walk you through in this session, the why, right? And the emphasis here is on the we, so it's not just me lecturing you guys for an hour. I'm really excited to be bringing in the voices of innovators who are really on the front lines of climate adaptation. So we've got Laura, Ronald, Ashley, all dialing in from East Africa, and they'll be sharing with us today the real realities of climate change that they're seeing right now and how their work is ensuring a climate resilient future for those most in need. And of course, they're going to help us understand the critical role that weather intelligence, global weather intelligence, is going to be playing in the incredible change that they're bringing to the world. And then we're also joined by Aravind from TomorrowNow, TomorrowNow's founding technology partner, and he's going to help us understand the power of weather intelligence and how TomorrowNow are using space to move the needle and ensure that climate adaptation is enabled through weather intelligence. So with that, let me start by saying that there is a phenomenal opportunity with weather intelligence to power the next generation of climate resilient solutions and lift billions out of poverty, right? And what is weather intelligence? Well, it's the ability to turn weather data into action, to drive decisions with forecasts. Heavy rains tomorrow, clear your gutters, harvest your tea leaves before the rains come to prevent damage, right? That's weather intelligence. And we're going to dig into this more with Aravind shortly, and also why space is important. But really what I wanted to focus on for a minute is the right now, right? How are lives being impacted right now? What are the changes that we need to see to better act and adapt, right? This is a picture that you can see on the screen that friends from the Red Cross team in Kenya shared with me, right? It's people being pulled out of the water after a severe flood event that happened last year, right? We're all familiar with these images, right? The recent flooding in Germany, the New York floods post Hurricane Ida. All deaths are tragic, right? Completely avoidable, right? And the inequalities are extreme, right? The death toll in Kenya was orders of magnitude higher from this event, in the thousands. And then you pair this with the major road disruptions across the region. People couldn't get to market to sell their produce. Crops were destroyed by the heavy rains, right? The social and economic consequences were enormous, and very few people received an early warning. The picture on the right, that's Lake Victoria around the same time. Lake Victoria flooded for the first time in 70 years. There were over 200,000 homes underwater or submerged in that image, right? The dam struggled to manage the capacity due to poor weather intelligence. And again, the communities around the lake also, they didn't receive a warning, no early warnings. And of course, you know, this devastation, it's representative of the bigger picture here. Migration, death, destruction. 20 million people migrate or leave their homes every year due to extreme weather and climate events. This is the picture here of the beautiful Lake Victoria. 2,000 people die on that lake annually, mostly because of unexpected bad weather and the fact that the fishermen can't swim, right? Pests and disease. The poster that you can see here is a false codling moth. A Kenyan farmer and friend once told me that he lost half of his year's profit from this pest. You can better manage that with weather intelligence, right? And remember, most farmers do not have crop insurance, no protection, right? So smallholder farmers, they produce 80% of the food supply in Africa, yet 90% of there's a 90% chance of crop loss due to these kinds of pest outbreaks and severe drought and flooding. Right, so my point here is climate change is here, extreme weather is here, and the inequalities are astronomical. 91% of deaths from extreme weather are in emerging markets, 91%. And that's the data that we're tracking currently, right? That doesn't include things like extreme heat. Our world saw the first climate-triggered famine this year in Madagascar due to locust and drought. And, of course, there's an increasing peer-reviewed science saying that these events are going to become more frequent. And again, very few receive early warnings, let alone practical, timely actions that could help protect their lives and livelihoods. But listen, we can't prevent these extreme weather events, cyclones, heavy rains, drought. They're happening right now, but we absolutely can predict them. Moreover, we can help people prepare and take action. And this is really the key message of today's session. We can take climate action now. Okay, so going one level deeper here, why? What is driving these inequalities and how can we address them? Why has early warning, response, action traditionally been so hard so far? Why do we need new geospatial and weather innovations to close this gap? So let's first look at the inequalities of data, right? The global weather gap. If we're going to make decisions based on weather and weather intelligence, we need a resolution that's relevant enough to the folks on the ground, right? The inputs and observations are so critical as part of this process, right? And they're just not equitable today, right? So this is the current state. You can see it on the slide, right? The global weather gap. On the left, you can see weather station density. On the right, terrestrial radar coverage, right? Both are, I guess, more reflective of GDP than population density, right? Major gaps in the regions that are most in need. So clear. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about the global weather gap. Now, clearly, there have been huge advancements in the weather sector over the last decades, and of course, space. A 3-day forecast a decade ago is as good as a 7-day forecast today, at least in the US and Europe. And our ability to predict extreme weather events like drought and locust, it is improving. Weather models play a big part of this, right? Numerical weather prediction models in particular, right? This allows us to fill the gaps as best we can, both temporally and spatially. And of course, satellite coverage has improved. Resolution for decision-making for weather intelligence, right? But the satellite data and coverage is most often not focused on operational use, which is a key word we're going to pick up on later with Aravind, right? Especially in the context of climate adaptation solutions. So this problem is widely recognized, especially for specific weather parameters that we most need to make these predictions, such as rain and precipitation, and everyone is suffering as a result, right? Because poor weather observations has a knock-on effect across the whole weather value chain. Poor observations lead to poor accuracy of forecasts and models and poor last mile usage, right? And so despite the fact that we've got 500 million people on the continent of Africa with a mobile phone by 2025, the weather data that will be accessible to them through their mobile phone is going to remain poor and untrusted unless we do something about it. So we don't need incremental improvements anymore. We need fundamental change. But I think one of the big questions that we try to ask through TomorrowNow and with our partners is, why hasn't this been solved up to now? There are lots of people, lots of organizations globally with the funding and the weather intelligence and the technology to drive this change. Why haven't we solved this problem yet? So one lens that I wanted to draw our attention to is funding, right? It's a big question of who is going to pay, right? Low-income countries, they've got limited budgets, right? Their budgets are at least 25 times less than budgets in the US and in Europe. And it's not surprising, right? When you've got less than 20% of the population who are able to pay income tax, the funding that they have available in country to solve these kinds of and fund these kinds of activities long term is going to be smaller, right? And then you've got the international development agencies and the philanthropic community. Clearly, we all care about driving change in this space, and a huge amount of funding has been invested already. But often, and up to now, a lot of the funding has gone into kind of these shorter term grants, mostly academic studies, where we've learned a ton. We've learned a lot. But now, as we think about the sustainability and the operational applications, it's just not being prioritized. And, Unfortunately, academic studies are not designed to engage and support the private sector, to ensure the parametric insurance industry, to support new innovations and businesses that can support climate adaptation. So that's where we think that there's a focus. And when you fund a short-term grant to support the implementation of weather sensors on the ground, right, like the one that you can see, what happens? Well, if it's a 5-year grant, you're not going to have enough resources to fund the calibration and maintain that long term. Right. And also the security, you're not going to be able to pay for the security to protect and stop those parts from being stolen. And as a result, you do really have a graveyard of stations across the continent like this one. And then, I think my final point on this is, of course, right, the majority of aid funding today, it still does go to crisis, right? It doesn't go to resilience. It goes to crisis. So for the locust crisis, $74 million just went to aid in East Africa to make sure people could feed themselves, right? Another 120 million went to spraying, right? Very little investment is going into early warning innovations, right? The future, how do we build resilience and long-term resilience in country to help people most in need? And I bring up the funding because it is highly relevant in the context of the conversations that are going on for this week and next week. There are incredible and exciting, huge commitments in the context of climate finance coming from COP, from the governments and from the philanthropic sector. And what we want to make sure is that it's prioritized to think about the long-term sustainability of these solutions, right? And to find ways to engage the folks on the ground who are at the forefront of innovation and be able to bring long-term climate resilience and adaptation solutions to bear. So, but we're not focused on the problems and the challenges here. We are focused on the opportunity, right? Hope and opportunity. And the good news is there really is hope, especially from the geospatial and space industry. You can see a quote from Kathy Sullivan here. If you don't know Kathy, she's an incredible lady. She is the first American woman to walk in space and reach the deepest point in the ocean. She's a former NOAA administrator, an astronaut, Tomorrow.io advisor. And she says here, right, capturing it loud and clear, the opportunity is in monitoring from the skies. Active radar on satellites for the first time will provide radar coverage for the 5 billion outside of coverage today. 5 billion are outside of coverage today. And that's not ground radar that's the solution here, it's space radar for operational use that's going to enable this dramatic improvement. And we will again pick up on this with Aravend a little bit later. And then this good news is going to ripple across the weather value chain, right to the last mile, with innovations happening across this value chain that we're eager to bring to regions that are most in need. And again, we'll pick up on this a little bit later. So the hope clearly doesn't stop there, right? Because of course, in terms of last mile or the front line, right, there's a huge and growing landscape of brilliant climate resilient solutions on the ground, right? Their solutions can be empowered and can be enabled by this weather intelligence. Let's go back to the Red Cross photo for a minute, right? The good news is, right, the Red Cross team are there, right? They're pulling people out of the water. What happens if they'd got there, 30 minutes earlier? What happens if they'd known a few days in advance that this event was going to happen? How much more prepared would they have been? How many more lives would they have saved? Rescue.co is another amazing emergency response company in Nairobi, right? Just imagine that if their responders were empowered by weather intelligence, and not just how many more lives we would save, but how much better prepared everyone would be, how to pre-position crews. And of course, on the Locust, which we'll talk about in a moment, right, instead of looking at this, looking at fear at these New York City-sized swarms on the horizon, what if farmers were pre-warned and equipped with practical actions that could help them mitigate the risks on their own farms, at their own properties? Think of the opportunity. And I think that's a really key point. Think of the opportunity here. So there is a growing landscape of phenomenal climate action solutions. It certainly gives me hope, and I'm really hoping to kind of dig into this in just a moment. So finally, before we dive into the panels, I didn't go into too much detail on what TomorrowNow actually does on a day-to-day. the events and the projects and the partnerships, the farmer first engagement. But hopefully I did give you a better understanding of the global weather gap challenge that we've taken on as a nonprofit, and also the opportunity that can come from building these bridges between weather intelligence and climate adaptation innovations and innovators. So our approach at TomorrowNow is always to learn by doing, and to listen and to respond to the people who actually need it, right? The farmers on the front lines, the innovators on the front lines. And that feedback loop is really important, to tighten that feedback loop between the innovators and the front line and the tech. So this really, I think, hopefully sets up the rest of the conversation, where we'll make sure that feedback loop is tightened by listening and hearing and engaging in a conversation. So with that, here's my contact details if you'd like to get in touch and learn more. I would now like to welcome our wonderful panel and speakers. So let me first invite Aravind to join us. Aravind, are you with us?
Yeah. Hi, Georgina. Thanks.
Excellent. Okay, awesome. So we are now joined by Aravind. Welcome. He's the director of strategy with the space team at Tomorrow.io. Aravind actually has a background in all things Earth observation, and he continues to dedicate a good portion of his career to demystifying space and Earth observations through his podcast, TerraWatch. Please check it out. And so in the spirit of demystification, Aravind, I wanted to use the first 10 minutes here to help the audience really get their heads around the power of weather intelligence for good, the gaps, the opportunities, especially in the context of space. So can you start by just introducing Tomorrow.io, who you are, and then to help us understand what is weather intelligence, and explain the difference between intelligence and forecasts?
Sure. To start with Tomorrow.io, so we are a company founded about 6 years ago, based in Boston. We've raised over 200 million in funding, and we work with some of the largest enterprises in the world, providing weather intelligence and weather insights through our platform. And I'll get to the platform in a bit. But essentially, what we do is, own the value chain of providing the insights. Meaning, we are a vertically integrated weather intelligence company. From observations, the 3 steps that you showed, from observations, modeling, and insights, we take care of all 3. And the observations through our space program, again, I'll come to the space program in a bit, I'm sure we're going to chat about it. And we have our own models to help with the forecasts. And then more importantly, how do we get these forecasts in the hands of people in the way they would understand, which is the most important part of the process. So that's where our platform comes in, our API comes in, our mobile app comes in. The underlying technology that was used to create that insight, it does not add value, essentially. And that is what weather intelligence essentially is. If a farmer gets a notification saying there's going to be flash flooding tomorrow, or 40% chance of rain, it is good information. Let's assume that it's even accurate and there's going to be a 40-50% chance of rain tomorrow. It's not actionable. He needs to know in the context of what he wants to do tomorrow. He wants to take an action based on the information that he gets, and so the information needs to be actionable. Let's assume we have 100% coverage. And the second step, the models, let's assume the models are amazingly accurate. It's not possible to be 100% accurate, but let's just assume. Even with those 2 assumptions, we're still not solving the problem, right? Like, we are not getting the information across to people. So that's where intelligence comes in. And even if we were to provide a good forecast, unless we provide it in a way that makes sense to people and it's actionable for them, whoever they are, it can be an individual, a farmer, or just a citizen going about his life, or a business.
Yeah, that's really helpful as an overview. So I want to kind of dig a little deeper into the key innovations that are enabling weather intelligence here, right? You just touched on that weather value chain. So the user-facing tools to make weather more accessible and usable, the models, the observations, Can we start with the user-facing kind of technologies? What is most exciting about these tools, especially in the context of climate action?
Yeah, definitely. And as I was mentioning earlier, it's about how we get it's not just about what we provide with people, but also how, in a way that makes sense for them. So for businesses, they wouldn't probably want to chat with someone all the time. So it doesn't need to be a people service. They need a software. So essentially that's where our platform comes in. So businesses usually use our platform, because using the platform, you can not only get the forecast and understand what in the real time, what's the weather and what's the forecast, but also help you provide insights. So the platform allows people to set their own criteria. If the wind is less than 40 kilometers per hour, or the temperature is less than 30 degrees Celsius, we can run the flights or get the train from point A to point B. They can set all these criteria on the platform, and they can get the insights the way they need it. There's also the API. So there are a few enterprises that take our API and integrate the insights directly into their workflow. Not everybody needs or wants to sit and access the platform. They want to automate it. So it's not just about doing or investing in a technology and developing a solution, but also developing it in a way that it makes sense for the audience. I think the most important innovation is on the user-facing side, because that is essentially what will allow us to adapt to the changing climate.
Okay, so now Tomorrow.io space program, observation,
sure.
Right? And again, right, just as in the modeling space, there's been huge advancements in observations, and especially satellite technology, right? We've got NASA's GPM, we're using space data. So can you explain what is the problem that tomorrow's satellites are solving, and how are you doing that?
Sure. It fits into the observation, side of the value chain, where essentially there's not enough data sets around the world, and if we have to make the modeling better and have the intelligence in the hands of people the way they need it, for the early warning systems, or for farmers to plan for their harvesting, or when to fertilize their crops, you need to kind of solve the data gap. And the only way to solve that is by going to space. Weather, as you might imagine, is a global phenomenon. So if you have a satellite just over the US, if you have a satellite just over parts of Asia, it's not going to solve the weather equation. And we need data on from the oceans, how much rainfall is falling over over an area over a period of time, and we need in real time. So space allows us to do that. And today, advancements in space, both in terms of the access to space, the cost of access to space is lowered. Satellites are smaller now, which means that it can be cost efficient to send tens of satellites up, as opposed to one huge satellite, which is what happened historically throughout Earth observation, and especially in the case of weather. And you mentioned the NASA's GPM, the Global Precipitation Mission. It's the only satellite out there today that's collecting precipitation data. And real-time precipitation data is one of the most important components when it comes to forecasting the weather in real time and providing hurricane warnings, flood warnings. We talked about how important early warning systems will be for people to adapt to the changing climate. Extreme weather events are only going to increase and intensify. So this is basically a data gap that we're essentially trying to solve, and the best way to solve that is by going to space. So we're starting launch of the first two satellites from next year, and essentially we're going to provide hourly coverage, hourly revisit, which means that we're going to get data sets every hour, which is going to change the way we're going to look at flood forecasts and hurricane warnings.
How does that compare to what we're measuring today? So you'll be able to get hourly revisit rates. What is the current revisit rate for, say, the GPM? So
the GPM on average, it's every 3 days. It differs by where you're located in which part of the world, because it's in the geosynchronous orbit, like 36,000 kilometers away. And the average revisit is 3 days. So if you compare 3 days to every hour, you can only imagine the amount of efficiency or the accuracy in terms of the modeling, and essentially, it boils down to how all of this is going to translate to intelligence, the hands of people. The beauty is the people wouldn't even notice that there's just going to be data from space that's going to be used. They're just going to get better forecasts, and essentially that's going to help us adapt to the changing climate. I think that's the most important bit, right?
Brilliant. That's really helpful. Okay, final question for you. Clearly, this technology has major potential opportunity in Africa, on the continent of Africa, and particularly for serving underserved kind of communities most at risk. Just to kind of clarify for folks who might not understand the relationship, right? So TomorrowNow is a nonprofit 501c3 founded out of tomorrow.io, right? From tomorrow.io's perspective, why a nonprofit?
The most important reason is the impact. So essentially, once we have an innovation at hand, you don't want to wait before that innovation gets into the hands of people. And today, if you look at the ability to afford, or whether it's our platform, our API, or the app, you don't want that to be a reason to stop people from making use of the innovation. And weather data is very essential for the livelihoods of people. And as we mentioned earlier, extreme weather events are only increasing, and we wanted to get the innovation into the hands of people as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. And having a nonprofit allows us to do that, because it can get into the hands of people in the way they would need it, and especially if you were to do it collaboratively. I'm sure we're going to discuss that in the panel later about how we're doing that. Provide examples of how we can do that. So that can translate to action very quickly. It's essentially a no-brainer that we have this initiative going, so that people get access to the innovation, because we can have our space program and we can improve our models, but if the intelligence doesn't reach the folks and the underserved, what's the point of the innovation really, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And clearly that was a self-serving question, right? As someone, the person that leads TomorrowNow, but
Sure.
It really does help to, I think, hear it from the perspective of tomorrow.io and how we're kind of working together to kind of bridge technology and impact. So I think that's a perfect transition to
Sure.
the next conversation. So thank you, Aravind, for sharing that with us and more about tomorrow.io. So this conversation now, I want for you guys to help us understand what is actually happening now, right? And to learn more about the live solutions being developed that you guys are developing, right, to help farmers adapt to climate change, and of course where weather intelligence can help. So I've asked our three guests here just to start with opening statements. I asked them to share a photo for their introduction. And Laura, if you don't mind, I will invite you to share first. I'm just sharing my screen. Okay, Laura, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Georgie, and thank you so much for including us in the conversation today. My name is Laura Stanford, and I am the founder of The Bug Picture. We're a company that is passionate about using insects as a vehicle for positive change with reference to the environment, social aspects, including food security, as well as climate change. I think that there are so many wonders about insects that we are passionate about, but for the purposes of this discussion, I want to pull up a couple of facts about insects and why it is important. Firstly, the elephant in the room, and probably everyone's elephant in the room, is the fact that the population of the world is growing every year. In East Africa, we're expecting the population to double in the next 30 years. That means that we need double the amount of food. I know that seems obvious, but it's worth mentioning. It also means that we're going to need more than double the amount of meat and its derivatives because of socioeconomic changes. That means we're going to need more than double the amount of animal feed. Now, this might not seem like such a such an alarming thing. But when we look at what animal feed is actually made from, and the protein source of animal feed is soy and fish meal. Again, why does that matter? But if we delve into that, soy contributes to about 50% of deforestation of the Amazon every year. And that's not going to stop, right? As population grows and the Amazon gets smaller and smaller, and we always use the Amazon because it is this gigantic forest and it's mythical and magical. But this is also true for all of the other ecosystems that are being robbed as a result of population growth and the need to feed more people every year. We also need to talk about, we sort of play with two insects at the moment, and for the purposes of right now, we'll talk about black soldier fly larvae. They are able to consume organic waste. And if we look at the current landscape of the world, 1/3 of all food on the planet is wasted. That means that that's food that is lost on people's plates or in supermarkets. In places like East Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, we are looking at about 50% of food is lost before it reaches the market. So this is massive amounts of food that is being farmed every year that is never making it to the plate or is being wasted on people's plates across the world. And we need to find a way to deal with that waste so that it doesn't go to landfill and contribute to greenhouse gases. And this is where my bugs come in. Another problem which I've mentioned is then the protein which is required for the animal feed. And finally, we need to look at how we continue to feed people so that we do not see a world in East Africa, but certainly around the planet, where there are people who are hungry and starving. So one of the byproducts from black soldier fly larvae is actually incredibly beautiful organic fertilizer, which then contributes to soil health, which means that you can farm more from the same piece of land, especially given some really good and proactive and modern farming techniques. We can see more coming from the soil, including weather intelligence. If people are able to use information in order to get more from their soil, we're not going to face the current situation that we're in the region, which is there are more food insecure people in East Africa and the broader region than ever before, which is a massive problem, and that's something that we all need to be aware of. But sort of bringing it back to this conversation and where weather intelligence really is critical for us. If we look at this picture, this is not just a beautiful landscape of northern Kenya. This is actually a swarm of locusts that is arriving. And this is my team on the ground who took this photograph of the swarm just slowly moving towards them. And swarms of locusts are a climate change event, and locusts move with the weather. Sure, there are other elements that also drive their flight path, but locusts move with weather. And we are able to use weather intelligence to predict where locusts are going. Our project on the ground will be able to vastly benefit, as well as thousands of people who would then be able to have access to this intelligence through technology. I'm sure we'll go into more details of Project Locust, so I'll sort of end there.
Great, thank you, Laura. So we will dive into why locusts, why insect protein in just a moment. But Ronald, I'd like to welcome you now to share your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Georgie, for allowing me and inviting me over to this very wonderful panel discussion. So my name is Ronald Dianga, and I work at a company called Kenarava Group. And I'll just share with you just a little bit of what we do and what really our mandate is. I think first I want to jump right on where Laura's left. And I think Laura has mentioned very, very valuable points around the rising population in Africa, and most importantly, my country, Kenya. And the biggest question for me and for my fellow farmers is how are we going to feed this particular rising population? But let me reflect back and look at, climate change for me is really the biggest, risk multiplier, because it leaves us as farmers, at the mercy of Mother Nature. And our experience currently is characterized by unpredictable weather patterns. I am not able to tell when it's going to rain, when it's going to either do this so that I can be able to plant or harvest. And unfortunately, and this is the most unfortunate situation, is that weather forecasting is not sufficient for me as a farmer, and even for other farming communities. Hence, there's really an urgent need for us to be able to to leverage on maybe other technology or other tools that can enable us, like weather intelligence, to really get that precision in terms of providing us with that accurate data. For us as farmers, and other farming communities that we've engaged with from time to time, is that the Locust Invasion, that happened 2019, and I think Aravind also did testify to that fact. It came as the most devastating act of God. And I think Laura mentioned this. For us, we thought of locusts as an act of God, a severe punishment for probably the sins that we have committed. So I think it left us so devastated, and of course, without food, since most of the farms that were affected or were infested by the locusts were ravaged by the locusts and left literally the green matter to bare land. So really, this has caused us and cost very many farmers a lot of loss in terms of the crops that we grow. And that is why for us as Kenarava, we put our feet deep into this work and just look at how can we, through our farmer first approach, be able to crowd in the experiences of farmers like ourselves and like the others that Laura mentioned, who suffered the invasion by the locust, and also look at how then, or what kind of solutions and what kind of tools or maybe technologies available out there, so that then we can build the resilience of farmers going forward. But our strength is in listening and of course responding to farmers. But as you can see, for the millennial economy where I belong in, we the millennials are saying one simple thing, that in as much as yes, we are getting ourselves involved in agriculture, but we want no solution to be brought out without the farmer's voice. Because if it cannot be for us without us. These solutions must crowd in the voices of farmers and be sure that then it's really answering the key questions that we ourselves are asking. Because let's face it, the government and FAO did their best in trying to help us as farmers with the locust invasion. But our position and voice was not really much counted in these particular interventions. So I believe with the approach that we are having at Project Locust, by crowding that farmer perspective first is very important in building that kind of resilience to these particular farmers. One of the farmers called Lydia in Nyandarua County had this to say when we just had conversations in our normal farm engagements, that the locust invasion was a surprise attack. Although I had heard about it from my parents, when I saw the locust, I didn't imagine I could encounter it in my generation. I believe this statement can be changed with the power of weather intelligence, because we can be able to be informed. So I believe our only hope as young farmers looking into the future is that weather intelligence might be our hope. I don't want to suffer the consequence of being asked by my son in the future that you didn't do anything, when your time was. I want to take action and be able to leverage on the power of technology to transform their future.
Excellent. Thank you, Ronald. Well, that certainly fills me with hope, and we'll definitely dig in a little more into the work that you're doing in just a moment. Ashley, I'd love to invite you now to share your opening statement and to learn more about what you're doing.
All right, thank you, Georgina, for inviting all of us to be on this panel today. This is great. Again, I'm Ashley King-Bischoff, and I lead product at Sprout. I'm also a co-founder. And Sprout's both a climate tech and an insurtech startup. Sprout really is a mobile platform that helps farmers reduce their losses as a result of climate change. So a climate change adaptation financial tool. And we do this in two ways. The first, which I think is really relevant to today's conversation, is providing real-time weather alerts backed with agronomy information via text message or through our Android application. And we send these throughout the season. So on the back end of our technology, we will follow like daily weather forecasts and advise farmers through this digital communication on how they can mitigate any risks that we see coming or that already are there on the farm. And that advice is triggered when there's too much rain or is just like the right environment for a disease, for example. And some climate risks are just really too big for farmers to be able to mitigate themselves as an individual farmer. And for that, Sprout also offers seasonal crop insurance, so providing farmers a full climate adaptation protection. Sprout's a US-based company that builds the technology behind our protection, but we're pretty global. I'm here right now in Nairobi, Kenya. So we have operations in each country that we distribute our insurance in. Sprout actually originated with an endorsement by the Climate Finance Lab in 2019. The lab identifies, develops, and supports sustainable investment instruments that can drive billions of dollars to the low carbon economy. So the lab analyzed our instrument from a number of perspectives, so climate, social, and financial sustainability. And after that endorsement, we launched our first pilot here in Kenya last year during COVID, a fully digital tool experience for 2,000 farmers. I think really the big story is that farmers have a lot of risk. They bear the brunt of risks in supply chain, as Laura mentioned. They're producing about 80% of the world's food, but they're taking on most of the risk in providing that. So risks include like access to markets, like where are the buyers, how do they understand pricing information, political risks when governments choose to support certain crops in certain areas, financial risk, it's hard to get loans, it's hard to finance investments they want to make on the farm. But like really what we're seeing in the context of today is that climate and weather risk is one of the biggest one they face. A lot of crops are rain-fed in production. And as we know, and I think I learned firsthand, actually having worked with farmers for a number of years here in East Africa, is that they're experiencing the change in climate. They notice that rains, the timing of rains are shifting, the variability of rains, the amount of rain is shifting, and that's a big risk factor for them. And actually the big issue in insurance is that, only about 20% of smallholder farmers, the 500 million producing food across the world, have access to crop insurance. And that drops to just 3% in sub-Saharan Africa. So what Sprout really does is make insurance more accessible as we reduce the cost of providing it. Because farmers are so remote, visiting the farm with traditional insurance creates a big portion of the cost, and then maintaining relationships with those farmers as they have, years that are bad, actually makes insurance unprofitable. And so you don't see a lot of insurance companies offering them. So at Sprout, we provide like a platform to be able to register and monitor all the insurance processes throughout the season and reduce costs up to 30%. And I think the big thing for us is like incorporating the weather monitoring throughout the season actually allows farmers to take ownership and be able to respond to some of the risks that they're facing on a weekly or monthly basis that don't necessarily need insurance protection and keep their production levels up. But at the same time, those large extreme events that we're talking about, that's when the insurance piece really comes in. Okay, thanks so much.
Excellent, thank you, Ashley. So hopefully that gives us a great understanding of not just the challenges and the risks that are facing farmers, but the solutions, business models that are able to sustain and scale and grow over time. So let's just go back to Locust for a moment, and then we'll move on to insurance. So Ronald, can you tell us a little bit more about Project Locust and the work that you're doing and why it's different?
Thank you very much, George. I think this is where the conversation gets more exciting, because locusts are actually very interesting species of insects. I think Laura is the locust buddy who, of course, gave us a little bit of how she plays around with them. But let me take this time just to reflect back on the work that we are trying to do, and we are working in currently with Project Locust, in just trying to build up a solution together with the farmers that can be able to provide, a more robust kind of climate action system for them to be more resilient. And so what we embarked on is, yes, locusts came to Kenya, and really the consequences of locust invasion in Kenya, in the words of the farmers, is devastating. Some of them, of course, if you speak to them, will tell you, we saw it come like, just a cloud, and when we woke up in the morning, all our crops were down and all that we could see was bare land. You see, if you hear such experiences from these farmers, it tells you of the state of desperation that they were at. They never knew this was going to happen to them. They were just going on their normal, farming cycles. But unfortunately, this came and the experience was, as I've said. So therefore, as the Project Locust, we embarked on a journey just to try and, together with these particular farmers, look at how can we leverage, first of all, on the power of collaboration and bring different parties together and different organizations together with different experiences, and just also make sure that the farmer is also at the table. Because in most interventions, yes, they are very good to try and mitigate the effects of these locusts. But most importantly also is, how are we making sure that the person who is the end recipient is also at the table of, where we're having this particular conversation. And of course, TomorrowNow is using its experience and power of convening different partners as ourselves to just try and bring out the position of how we can build a really more robust climate action system to support the farmers, and of course, by the farmers themselves. And then we have a host of other partners like the back picture, and represented here, of course, Laura, who of course are helping us to not only, when we see the locusts, not only see them as a pest, but see opportunities in the skies and look at how then can we harvest these locusts and turn them into animal feeds, turn them into manure, like she said. So the other partners are digital green. So the most important thing is, once we have and we are building the information, we need to disseminate this particular information to be in the hands of the farmers, because that is the most important thing. The next time I travel to Nyandarua County, I wouldn't want to hear another farmer, say the locusts came and I didn't have anything to do. Through this project, we are putting power and information in the right hands of the farmers through the videos that we produce and disseminate through digital green. And of course, the way we are working through with this is to just make the farmer understand that there is also something that you as a farmer can be able to do, so that then you can be more resilient. Let's face it, science is pointing us that towards the future there are going to be more climatic events like the desert locust. Therefore, it is important, and that validates the point that we need to build the capacity of the farmers now to better prepare for those future infestations.
Right, that's really helpful context, Ronald. And I think just to pick up on one of those themes, right? Time and time again, when we started this, we kept hearing, well, what if we had the ability to get farmers early warnings, right? What would they do with that information? How could they take action? Is it that we should just leave it up to the government and FAO to respond, to spray, to kill the locusts, and then to fall back on aid when people are impacted? Or is there something more proactive that farmers can do if they have the power of information in their own hands? And so, Laura, I wanted to kind of go to you, because clearly, right, there are many practical things, right, that farmers can do on their farms if they're able to know in advance that locusts are coming. So I wanted you to share just a little bit on the pilot that you ran earlier this year with the farmers and with the locusts, and also just to kind of share a little more about some of the tangible actions that farmers can take on a farm to just mitigate their own risk against the locusts and even benefit.
Yeah, to mirror what Ronald said, what struck us last year as the desert locusts were just tearing across northern Kenya was the sense of helplessness that the farmers were experiencing. And I think this is, it's completely counterintuitive as a human on this planet to sit back and do nothing when your livelihood is being threatened. And then also to go from there to, we know that locusts are full of protein. This is, I mean, I'm not going to say globally known, because I don't doubt people really dabble in what is a locust, but we know that locusts are full of protein, and we know that especially in Kenya and in the broader East African region, there is a massive shortage of protein for animal feed currently. So why not look to the skies to create that source of protein that our country so desperately needs currently? And this is where the idea was born, was sort of marrying the fact that people were so desperate to be involved in the response in any way. So how do we empower the farmer? Well, how do we take what we know about locusts and insects to create a positive change with this crisis? So during the course of earlier this year, we ran a 6-week pilot where we tracked the locusts across northern Kenya. We followed them and when they were roosting at night, so essentially settling down for the night, we would go into communities and train them on how to harvest these locusts. And then the following morning, we would go back there and pay per kilogram of locusts that was harvested for people. And this approach gave people and empowered people to be part of the response, to go out and take an active role in their own livelihoods, which is very important, I think, for the psychology of a crisis. As well as then, we were putting money directly into the hands of the people whose farms were affected by locusts, which was, again, very, very important, because when locusts are on your land, they eat everything. And one of the major primary focuses was, how do we create processes that are rudimentary enough for smallholders to be able to do at a farm level, because the bug picture can't always be there. So in occasions, we will be there and we can pay for locusts and we can create that market for those locusts. But most times, especially when we look at what the solution is today, is empowering farmers to harvest locusts for personal benefit in Kenya. But our hope is that this type of approach becomes a response that is accepted in a far wider geographical area where desert locusts are experienced. And then obviously the bug picture is nowhere to be seen. So we want to create a solution that uses weather intelligence to move in front of the swarm, so that we're not chasing locusts across northern Kenya, because that's actually not a very feasible and scalable approach. So we want to move in front of them, and then we want to use technology to then put these types of language appropriate videos into the hands of people who can then take control of the situation on their specific piece of land, and also as a community. From a pilot perspective, and then this also speaks to scalability, because this is always the question that gets asked, is, but what difference can one farmer make? So in the course of the 6 weeks of our project earlier this year, we harvested 4.3 tons of locusts, which resulted in us creating over 10 tons of animal feed, and we paid out close to $2,000. The average farmer collected 20 kilograms of locusts every night. Now, if you look at northern Kenya, because we're looking at Kenya today, and you take thousands of farmers who are affected while waves of these locusts do travel with the wind, that is thousands of tons of locusts that you could collect on a nightly basis. This being said, this is definitely a solution that complements the FAO and the local government's response. We are not saying that this is the silver bullet for locust response. We're saying the central response is critical to controlling and monitoring the situation, but we can also involve the farmers in order to create a solution that empowers them to do, to weather the swarm. Today we're in Kenya, but tomorrow we hope to be in Ethiopia and Somalia, where there are locusts currently. And in 6 months' time, we hope to be in Yemen or in Djibouti, and these places where this is then a locust response that is broadly accepted. This being said, that same weather intelligence can then also be used for other insect pests or other farming techniques, much like, Ashley, you're well aware of this. But this is the power of this weather intelligence, is that we can take a system that gets developed to support a farmer-first approach. And sure, desert locust is the use case that I'm passionate about, but this use case can be then extrapolated into so many different versions.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura. It's such a powerful idea, as long as we can get the information into the hands of farmers in time, but also to listen to the farmers and to understand what kinds of actions that they want to take, they can make, and in time to help protect their farms, but also is the opportunity. Ashley, I wanted to move to you now. What kinds of intelligence do you want to be getting to the farmers?
Yeah, absolutely. they think there's a lot of similarities in, farmers being able to take action on the farm in real time. And I just wanted to set up some context. So like I talked a lot about like these multitude of risks that farmers are facing. And one way they approach like market risk and pricing risk is to get together. Like smallholder farmers maybe have an acre they're farming. They get together with hundreds or thousands of farmers, they have bargaining power. Awesome. So cooperatives are a big way to do that, or working with contract farming schemes with larger buyers. It's also a great way to sort of like reduce that risk. And another like upside of that is like when you have lots of farmers together, you can create standards around production. So you can put together crop calendars. Historically, we know that in Kenya, there are 2 rainy seasons. So you can expect rain, in October and then expect it in March, expect it. Traditionally you put these together for the whole year and you advise farmers to fertilize at a certain time, weed at a certain time. And time is real. You put dates on the calendar and say, because we know historically weather has been like timed in this way, you would act accordingly. And that's just not always true anymore. I think farmers have these crop calendars, agronomists work really hard to put them together and then do a lot of training and follow up. But then the weather shifts and farmers shouldn't be planting until the rain has come for a certain amount of time and they're confident that it's going to continue to come long enough so their germination stage reaches a certain success point that crop will continue to grow throughout the season. So we're, at Sprout, we're not inventing crop calendars, for sure not, but we are sort of saying that because we understand that the risk of climate and weather facing farmers is also a decision-making tool throughout the season. We do work closely with agronomists in those cooperative groups or these larger buyers that have certain quality standards that tie into these crop calendars to say, hey, the weather's not what you expected, or there's a certain threshold that's being reached around weather that could create an environment for a disease or a pest, like a locust. One example of like we're doing coffee in Kenya and, coffee farmers face like a number of challenges in climate across the world, but, coffee leaf rust, I think is a good example of where you can prepare your farm in advance to mitigate the risk. So like if the leaf rust fungus came, it spreads through wind, but it also spreads through human contact, like actually touching the leaves yourself and then like touching another plant and it sort of skips and hops over. So you can tell farmers that there's a way to prepare in case it comes to reduce the risk. So that means like spreading large enough paths outside of your farm. So if folks want to walk by because they don't have a main road they're walking through farms, make sure they have distance from your trees. Like that's really clever. Now weather intelligence comes in. So if we start to see the right environment for coffee leaf rust, enough humidity, enough precipitation during, sort of a certain time period in the season, we can remind farmers, you might want to start checking the leaves to see if the leaf rust is there. Instead of them checking every day, now they know, okay, I can wait for this alert to check. We also have a 2-way communication platform with farmers so they can tell us if they're seeing these pests and disease, and then we'd feed that back into the same program or community. And now if a farmer identifies, I do actually have coffee leaf rust, we can then advise them if it's getting worse and say which sort of fungicides they should be using for that coffee leaf rust as part of their program. So it's like really specific to their realities. You're not suggesting something that they can't afford, that isn't part of their program, that's completely outside of the realm of like normal farming practices, because it would be hard for them to do that. So it's really feeding back into them what is normal, but also timing it in a way that is sort of practical. So it's a really holistic approach. And without weather intelligence, you're just sort of mimicking a historical calendar that may or not be helpful. Like a farmer buying a fungicide when they don't need it is silly. But them being able to see, okay, I see it coming, I might be able to invest in it, it might be worth it. I see, I'm getting those checks. That's them taking that risk and mitigating it themselves on the farm, allowing them to maintain their production levels. Yeah. Oh, I believe you're muted. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ashley.
Welcome.
This has been a brilliant conversation, and thank you everyone for contributing and giving us a lens into your world. I think that the takeaways here, right? Climate change is clearly here. We all recognize the importance of needing to act and adapt now. And there's hope, there's opportunity, and there are phenomenal innovations and businesses and entrepreneurs like Ashley and Laura and Ronald and Aravind on the technology side, these solutions at the front lines. And with weather intelligence as an enabler, the possibilities are really endless, not just in terms of mitigating risk, but also enabling this opportunity on the ground for feeding our planet, for enabling these resilient solutions, driving economic growth and lifting billions from poverty, which is our ultimate goal. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ashley and Laura, Ronald, Aravind, for a great conversation. And we look forward to continuing.